Welcome back, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good, Brian. I'm really excited about this topic because I think it's something we've both gone through when looking at where we're going to live, and it's really the core of what we want to do when it comes to buying and upgrading properties and adding the value. So definitely looking forward to this conversation. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited as well. Like you mentioned, we're going to talk about what value add is in multifamily properties, why we really like this type of strategy specifically, and kind of what it means overall. Really, value add strategy is just identifying an underperforming asset or an undervalued property and implementing a strategy to add value to that property, right? And there's a ton of different ways that you can add value through increasing rents and updating the units and different things that we'll talk about today. And so, really, the essential uh, thing that we want to do with this value add property like potential is really increase the NOI, which is the net operating income of the property. And that thus increases the cash flow, which results in higher property values and thus higher returns for investors. So we'll get into today kind of how we do that, what we look at in certain properties, and like how we can potentially just add value to certain underperforming assets that we identify.
Yeah, and what we want to do is almost take you on a bit of a journey. So as if we were all pulling up to this property at the same time together. So really starting it off in what are your first views of the property, which is where you're pulling into the parking lot, you're evaluating what does the outside of the property look like, what's the landscaping look like. So we're going to jump in and we're actually going to do it as if we were doing a bit of a guided tour for you. So let's think about as we're pulling in to the parking lot. The first thing you're going to see is ultimately what does that property look like from the outside. So when we talk about the landscaping, it's has the landscaping being kept up to date? Is it clean? Is it fresh? Are there nice blooming flowers in the flower beds versus old shrub and overgrown bushes that are driving that? But also the parking lot itself, right? The safety of the parking lot and making sure that it's tarmacked correctly, there's no potholes in there. And that's great, not only from an initial look and feel perspective, but also from a risk perspective, right? Because the last thing you would want for any of your tenants is to trip, fall, damage any of their property as a result of you not maintaining your parking lot correctly or the sidewalk or anything like that as it relates to the property.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Often referred to as curb appeal, right? When you're driving past a nice asset or a nice piece of property, you notice that, right? That's the first impression that a lot of tenants might see. And a lot of times in these underperforming assets or properties that have been owned for a long time or are mismanaged, that tends to lack, right? When you're looking at the landscaping, there's weeds growing, the grass is long, like you can kind of spot it out relatively quickly. What does the signage look like in the front of the property? Like, how is it attracting potential tenants? And like, is this somewhere where you pull into or drive past and say, hey, that looks like a really nice property. I'd like to live there. Or you drive past it thinking the opposite of, you know, this doesn't look like a very appealing property. And this is the first initial right reaction. And we actually prefer the properties that are overgrown and don't actually look that nice from the outside because we feel that we can implement, some of the systems and processes that we do to now improve the quality of this asset and this property. So this is before we, you know, are looking at or talking about specific numbers of like the income of the property, but more so just the visualization of what it looks like. The numbers could be we don't know where they're at this point. Like they could be drastically low. They could be achieving market rents, which is unlikely if the property is looking like it needs some work. But this is just one thing that we identify, especially when pulling up to a property to do a property tour, whether it's directly with the owner or a broker, and then taking notes of what we can improve on, from the outside or just the exteriors to start.
What's the saying they say? First impressions last, and I think it's exactly the same with a property. You just want, and everybody feels more comfortable coming home to something that looks nice, it's clean, it's well maintained.
Mhm. No, that's exactly it. So for this example, Chris, why don't we use like what would be a 50 unit? So we're driving in and it's a 50 units, right? And we've talked about a little bit from the exterior. You mentioned the parking lot. Has it been paved recently? Are there proper lines on it for, parking spaces? Like that's all minimal stuff, but it's all important to tenants, right? Sometimes you might see parking lots having specific numbers per space, right, for the units to identify like what unit has which space, if a unit gets two spaces. And that's all stuff that's nice to have as a tenant, right? So you naturally will attract a higher tenant if you're able to provide these things just from an outside perspective, right? And this is before we even walk into any units or really get on the property itself. Um, so that's one thing that we'd like to identify, definitely to start. And this is again something that you can see from outside on the road, often referred to, as we mentioned, as curb appeal. So then once we drive into the property, um, there's also other things that we can do to add value from the inside of the units and then amenities within the property, right, Chris? So why don't we kind of talk about a little bit when we talk about inside the units, what we can do next?
Yeah. So again, I think one of the other important things is as you're like entering into the property. So some properties have multiple units, where you may have, if we're talking about 50 unit, there may be 5 buildings of 10 units
Mhm.
that are separated. You may have one building with 50 units in it. But as you're approaching and you're walking through those initial doors, it's do you also have lighting within the hallways so that you can see exactly where you're going, that you feel safe of an evening when you're entering the property? And again, I think all of this is back to before we've even entered the unit, right? These are the things that people will look at as you're walking through these properties on a tour, for example. So as you open the door and you go into the unit, this is really where you can start driving up again some of the market value and the appeal to a potential renter of, if I walk in, is the flooring nice? Is
Mhm.
it freshly painted? As we're going around the property, are the kitchen cabinets new? Are the countertops, do they look fresh? Are they old versus, right? Do you have old white appliances or are they now stainless steel appliances? So all of these things are small little details that maybe you're not thinking of immediately, but as you are a renting tenant, you can go in and those are things that you would start taking note of.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, everyone has or is either living in an apartment or a house of their own and has some type of, um, finish in their house, whether it's their kitchen or their bathrooms. And depending on when that structure was built, right? Some of them have been updated, some of them haven't. So, for this example, again, we're looking at a 50 unit, and say this was built in, 1993, right? Today it's 2000. Well, I guess it's 2024 now. I was going to say 2023. So we're freshly in 2024. So say it's about 30 years old. You could imagine, right, if there's been no upgrades to those units in 30 years, right, since 1993 to now, right, there's a lot of improvements that can be done. Um, and the structure of the building may be very good still, because 30 years for a building with foundation isn't really that long. But we're talking about now, how can we update cosmetically to feel newer and nicer to tenants, right? To attract that higher quality tenant who's willing to pay a little bit more than maybe the current tenant in place, or the current tenant's willing to pay a little bit more if we go in and really just fix up that unit for them, right? And as you mentioned, you generally hear the kitchen being one of the most important rooms, if not the most important room in a house or an apartment. And so, what does that look like? Are the cabinets old, right? Could they use updated cabinets? Could they use updated countertops, right? New flooring, and these could be anywhere between five to $10,000 renovations, upwards to $25,000 to $30,000 renovations, all depending on the type of finishes you choose, and really the kind of tenant that you're going to attract at that property, and ultimately where that property is located. What is a tenant base that you're going for? Um, and those are all decisions that will play into really that property's business plan, right? So depending on the market, You hear about the, location, location, location all the time with real estate. So like, where is that property located specifically? Are you attracting more so a collar working class or a blue collar working class? What kind of finishes in that market that we feel is the most applicable for the tenants we're trying to attract? And that's really what we put into the business plan even before purchasing or looking at a property, right? Like really identifying what that looks like. But that's just some of the start of where the renovation is starting. The kitchen is just one, right? The bathroom would be another, painted walls or new flooring in other rooms as well.
Yeah. So when we're presenting like a property, like you mentioned there, Brian, the business plan, these are things that you're going to see under the capital expenditure or the CapEx budget, is what we've taken into account to go in and renovate the units, renovate the parking lot, update the landscaping, right? All of that does have costs, and that is built into what we would include in our CapEx budgets. But that's also what is built into the pro forma. So what we're going to do is we're going to be checking to make sure that these updates that we are making to these units are actually in line with what the rest of that market is doing in terms of properties. Because the other thing that we need to be mindful of is you may be in an area where people are not demanding an A-class property, right? You may not need stainless steel appliances in the kitchen. They may be very happy with white appliances in there. So again, those are things we need to take into consideration. It's not always better going high end, like you said there, the $25,000, $30,000 updates to a unit. It could be that just the $5,000 to $10,000 updates is exactly what that property needs to attract a slightly higher tenant class that is willing to pay the extra $100, $200 a month in rent. So again, all of that does go into that overall business plan and strategy as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And to your point as well, like what goes hand in hand is not only the finish within the apartment, but what kind of other amenities this, complex could offer. So depending on the market and what other comparable apartment complexes or communities in the area or this specific market are offering will also help us determine what we want to offer at our property as well. So, a dog park being one, right? A fitness center being another. Like these could be amenities that are potential for a property community or may not make sense for that specific property. But those are all additional amenities on outside of being internally in the unit that could offer value to not only us as property owners and investors because of increasing the value in the income through some of these things, but also be an increased amenity to the tenants, right? They want to do more on site at their property or at their community, right? I know Chris, you and I, we work from home, on our W-2 3 times a week, and it's flexible. But we don't always want to work from necessarily our apartment. Maybe we want to go to the conference center or the on-site office, right? That's in the common area of our building, and that's just another amenity that we can add to potential tenants who, if you have two people like yourself and your significant other who are both working from home, maybe one wants to go to the common room or the conference room on site. And these are all just, again, added benefits with what's going on in today's world with maybe some work from home or some flexibility and having that, flexibility being there on site within the community.
Yeah, and again, these are things that can be charged back to the tenant, right? So you talk about the fitness center as one of your examples, Brian. I know that, again, when I was evaluating where I wanted to move into, that was a key consideration is the fitness center there and available, or how close is the nearest fitness center? I don't want to have to necessarily get in my car or walk 10, 15 minutes to go to a fitness center when I'm working from home. If it's within my building, I can go during lunchtime. It gives me additional flexibility. I can go in the mornings directly after work without having to have that additional travel time. And those are the things that when you do start including those, so as an example, let's say of the 50 units, we added a fitness center, and it was an additional charge on top of the rental payments that each tenant was paying, and it was $50 to have access to the fitness center. let's just use as an example, 25 of the units have adopted leveraging that fitness center. That actually will add a total of $187,500 to the value of that property based on that net operating income. So again, just by adding a fitness center into that property and having people pay a little bit extra to have access to it, ultimately drives the value of that property up, drives the cash flow up, which is distributed to the investors and the owners. And overall, it makes happier tenant bases, it's happier investors, and ultimately just provides an overall better community for everybody involved. It was certainly a big consideration for when I was looking at my new apartment as well.
Yeah, we know you like to get in the gym.
Yeah.
But what cap rate did he take that off of to get that 187?
Yeah, I used an 8 cap rate there. I didn't want to go too low because obviously it does depend on the sale cap rate and ultimately the
The
market cap
market,
rate
right?
as well. So I just used an 8. Rough numbers here. We're not talking a specific, but again, keep your eyes peeled for that information in the business plan that gets presented, because those are key metrics that will be included in there. One of the things we also didn't mention as a potential within the unit, right, is washer dryer in the unit. The reason why I think of that is my dryer is currently on and I can hear it in the background, but that was a key consideration of, do I want to go to a laundromat? Does the apartment have laundry in the building in general, or does it have, or do certain apartments offer it in unit? And again, that allows you to charge additional rents for that specific unit or for that building that does have it on site as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. A lot of these nice to have amenities that tenants are willing to pay more for, right? For the convenience factor of it, which I know me and you are in that same boat. I have a gym in my building as well, and it's so convenient not having to leave the property to go to the gym. Um, and to your point, like we'll get into more of how we show value at like how does it calculate in the total purchase price. So like you mentioned an 8% cap rate, we'll do other talks or episodes about how that value increases based on the net operating income. So essentially, if this property is, uh, you know, 50 units and say roughly we bought it at $100,000 a door, that's $5 million, right? How can we now take that $5 million property and raise the value of it to eventually sell it for $8 or $9 million? And that's obviously by increasing, rents by adding value. But a lot of times we want to identify these properties that are undervalued rents, but also there's other, tips and tricks that we can do to add additional income sources, right?
Yeah.
Additional storage on site, right? Like there might be 2 or 3 closets in a unit, but some tenants may pay more for storage on site instead of going to the local storage unit. We offer storage on site that they may pay $50 a month for. So there's a lot of different ways to generate more income, but also give convenience to the tenants. And typically, when we're looking at properties, we want to identify these value add tips that we can do to make the changes that the current management who owns it may not be doing. And then we can additionally, add value to the property, to the investors, and ideally make and exceed the return projections that we are projecting on that property.
Yeah, and this is also one of the reasons why we love multifamily versus single family, because in the multifamily world, you can force the appreciation of that asset by adding the value there and increasing the net operating income, versus a single family. You may do all of these upgrades to your single family, but you still will be compared to the comps of that area for a 3-bedroom house, for example. And that's really one of the real reasons as well why we're so invested in the multifamily, is that ability to force the appreciation and force the value of that property based on the net operating income. And what we'll do is we'll post some additional content on some of these key terms that we've been using: cap rates, net operating income, forced appreciation, and various other ones that we've leveraged throughout the episode, just to again, if you don't understand exactly what those are, you can educate yourselves or just reach out to the two of us, and we'll do that too. I didn't just want to stop us there, Brian, because whilst that is what can we do in terms of value add from the physical units, what it looks like from the outside, the safety of the parking lot, etc. There's also value add from an operational standpoint as well, right? So when you think of these mum and pop owners that have owned the property for 30 years, that are just doing the same things that they've done time and time again, they are making money on their property. Maybe they don't want to go through the process of actually formalizing standard operating procedures, move in costs, move out costs, pet fees, and things like that. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the operational value add that can be had as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. So typically when we see some of these long-term owners or mom and pop owners that we refer to them often is they lack some of those systems and processes that we may have in place to better streamline the efficiencies of the property, right? Obviously, we want to have this property occupied at 100%. That isn't always realistic when you're talking about that many units. However, we want to have the occupancy as high as possible at all times, right? Turnover costs are killers, right? We want to make sure that, we're keeping happy tenants, they're paying close to market rent, and we're offering them a great community to live in. But a lot of times, these mom and pop owners are lacking some efficiencies in the operations. And so that could be from the leasing process, right? Their marketing strategies, like how are they going to market, in that specific market to look for good high quality tenants. How quickly are they turning over units? Because again, turnover costs can, if a unit stays vacant for a full month, right? That is, if the average rent is $2,000, that's $2,000 that you just lost in potential revenue because that unit stayed vacant, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can do it from an in-house management to really make sure that the efficiencies and the processes that we put in place from the day of takeover are there so that we're really managing this property at a very high level. And so we could, make sure that that income stays steady and consistent throughout the ownership.
And there's stories of people in the industry that have identified some of these systems and processes as being real, almost killers to the deal when you're doing the underwriting. And one that sticks out is people siphoning off payroll costs and actually just paying themselves that overall cost. And if that's $50,000 a year, and that's just being siphoned to one of the owners as a quote unquote payroll cost, that's $50,000 of net operating income that otherwise was on the books as an expense that isn't actually a true expense. So these are the things that we will really, really look out for as we're going through that underwriting process, is to see where can we tweak and really drive efficiency, as you said, Brian, in the overall operations of each of these properties. So again, this is why coming to somebody like us who is looking into all of these details on a day-to-day basis when we're going through and underwriting these properties allows us to be really those experts on your behalf. Is there anything else, Brian, that you wanted to add?
No, I think this was a great overview of how we can add not only physical value, but add value through management as well. And really identifying what we're looking for in properties, right? It's not just, getting the property at a good price. It's the potential that is in a property that we really love the most, and how we can put our twists on it, right, through management and through our value add opportunities to enhance the revenue of that property overall, right? Generally goes by net operating income in the industry. And again, we'll go over all of this stuff more. But how can we ultimately increase the net operating income to increase our cash flow, to increase our returns to investors, but also offering our tenant base a nicer place to live in a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. And if you haven't yet, make sure you visit the website, 7peakcapital.com. Click the request invitation button, schedule a call with Brian or myself. Make sure that you've signed up to our newsletter so you can be kept up to date with everything that we're doing. But again, great conversation, Brian. We'll be back again for some more soon.
Thanks, Chris. Talk soon on the next one.
Bye-bye.